Now, the Hunt Palmer Show.
Yes! I feel like I've been waiting for this my entire life.
You're listening to the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Jolly good fun. Jolly good.
Locking down the middle of the day.
America's favorite daytime fun show.
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
Welcome in. Hunt Palmer coming to you from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city on this Thursday, working towards the weekend. Glad you're hanging out with us here on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Got Jacob Beck and Cassie Spazzali back there on the ones and twos, and honestly, fired up to be back here with you. Took the last 3 days away. My lovely bride went into labor there on early Sunday morning, like 45 minutes after spring forward. So really no sleep in the Palmer house that night. Got to the hospital before 5 o'clock. Baby Keller showed up in the early afternoon hours. And I've been with family since we were discharged back on, I guess that was Tuesday when we headed home. So fired up to be here on this Thursday. Appreciate all the well wishes that we got on Twitter and certainly from the staff here at ESPN. It's been an awesome couple of days in the Palmer house, and we are so excited to have added to our family now of 4. Just 3 in the house right now as the little guy's up in Shreveport with his grandparents, but the madness, I'm sure, will soon follow here over the last couple of days. So Beck and Cassie, y'all made it without me here. Taylor held down the fort. We're all good. Everything's all right.
Yeah, we're okay. I mean, Taylor, you know, he's not Hunt Palmer, but he did a serviceable job, I have to say.
So on Tuesday, yeah, it was Tuesday. That makes sense. So we are getting out of the hospital. We've been in the hospital for 3 days there. Alyssa literally hasn't left the room since we moved up there on Sunday evening. And we go downstairs, get the baby in the car seat, load all the suitcases up, and we get in. She's got to go around the corner to the pharmacy, and she goes in the pharmacy and comes out. And as she's coming out, Taylor is welcoming Sharif into the show, and they immediately start talking about the names of our children, which is the first time Alyssa has been interested in ESPN Baton Rouge in 5 years. So great that programming there. Timing. Perfect timing for us as we headed out of there. And nobody said anything that made Alyssa mad, which is wonderful. But yeah, it was great. It was a thrill. I continue to be awed by the healthcare workers. It's remarkable to me to watch them do their jobs and understand just how important and complicated what they're doing is, and all the machines and all the buttons and all the things they've got to take care of and everything that's got to go perfectly right. And I consider that's just a normal work day for them. And I sit here and talk about LSU losing by 30 in the SEC basketball tournament, and that's what I do here for a living. There's degrees of importance to everyone's job, and just could not be more thankful to the entire staff at the hospital over the weekend. It was incredible, as it was for Myers 3 years ago, and we're excited to have Keller here with us, and family of 4 in the Palmer house now. Guess it's a brave new world that we'll get into, and we got to get into some sports. I've missed a lot since I've been away since Friday. We got some football to talk about. I was at practice yesterday, wrote a practice report up at LouisianaSports.net. We'll talk with Luke in about 15 minutes. Joe Healy from D1 Baseball's SEC Extra Team. There's SEC baseball coming up this weekend, which I'm so fired up to talk about. Basketball season comes to an end last night. We'll discuss that. Jay Johnson met with the media today and talked to OTB this morning, so plenty to chew on there. Chris Blair will be with us back from Nashville. SEC Power Rankings. We're beyond loaded for the next 2 hours, so let's get started the same way we start every single day with our Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's Opening Drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
So I went out to football practice yesterday. Really interesting just in terms of like sensory reactions out at practice yesterday. It was 8 a.m. practice. We got out there at about 7:40, and temps were in the low to mid 50s. I'm used to going to football practice in August when it's 104 and you can't breathe. This was nice to have like a chill in the air to go watch some practice. We were able to go up on the balcony of the Players Lounge and watch for about 25 minutes as the team went through drills. As you're all, I think, very well aware now, we're not learning anything earth-shattering out there, specifically not in the first open spring football practice. But one of the things that I did take note of, and I wrote in my practice report over at LouisianaSports.net, was the look of the quote-unquote, and I very much use air quotes here, of the first team offensive line that we saw. It was the group that was out there with Garrett Nussmeier, out there with Caden Durham, out there with Trey'Dez Green. You had your returning receivers, Chris Hilton, Aaron Anderson, and Xavion Thomas. But the offensive line did not look exactly the way that I thought that it might look. You did have over at left tackle Tyree Adams, which he played in the Texas Bowl there at left tackle. Paul Mabenga played left guard. DJ Chester was the starting center for the first team, and I very much expected to see Braylon Moore there. He actually ran with the second team. Bo Bordelon was the right guard, and then the former five-star Weston Davis was the right tackle. So that was the look. Tyree Adams, Paul Mabenga, DJ Chester, Bo Bordelon, and Weston Davis. And so I looked at that and I'm going, okay, that's a lot of guys that have been in the program for a year or two, that were highly recruited, that have been with Brad Davis, that were his handpicked guys. And that's kind of where LSU will start here in the spring. And Brian Kelly went to the microphone just after practice was over and talked about replacing what is 4 starters on the offensive line that have moved on and are out of eligibility now, and how he sees that as a big piece to what they're doing in the spring.
We lost them after the Oklahoma game is kind of how we looked at it. And then we went to work against Baylor with kind of developing a new group. And we feel like, it wasn't really 4 out of 5. It was like trying to find a couple of guys to fill in there.
And that's probably fair, because you feel like Braylon Moore is going to be the center, and you feel like Josh Thompson is going to start. I can't tell you if it's at left guard, right tackle, right guard. I'm not certain where he's going to be, but you feel like those 2 guys, Power 5 starters, are going to come in and start. So if you got those 2 guys, and potentially DJ Chester, who was a starter, maybe at one of the guards, you really do only have 2 spots there, and that makes sense in terms of what he's saying there. Now, Brian Kelly was asked, okay, well, what are your early thoughts on what those guys look like at this point?
I think Braylon's done a nice job early on. Kyrus Kern, Solomon, both of the freshmen have done a really nice job. I think they're physically able. They've got to be able to take the next step in terms of learning, the offense. But they're going to be really good SEC players. The bar here is pretty high, right? These are really good players that in time are going to help us. I think Weston Davis is doing a nice job. We're going to rely on the guys that got a lot of work for us last year. DJ Chester's gotten a lot of work for us. We'll see where that all ends up. But I think there's enough experience with young players that we're going to put together a really good offensive line.
I'm going to work off of 2 knowns in this take, quote unquote, on the offensive line. 2 things that I know. One is that Will Campbell has set himself up to be a very high first-round pick. LSU hasn't had one of those in 30 years. Okay? Emory Jones is going to be a pretty high pick. And Miles Frazier and Garrett Dellinger started a ton of games. Those are knowns. And LSU has not been a factory of NFL offensive linemen, especially in high picks. Yes, if you look in the league right now, Lloyd Cushenberry's doing a great job. Yes, Trey Turner had a nice go of it. La'el Collins has had a nice go of it, certainly. You look at Damian Lewis, who's made a name for himself. Will Clapp just signed with the Saints again. There have been guys that go to the NFL. Joe Barksdale had a good run of it. But it has not been early round draft picks, and Will Campbell's going to be one of those. And because of that, I feel like it's likely that LSU takes a bit of a step back on the offensive line. Now, I'll work off another known. Brian Kelly has got a template that he recruits to on the offensive line that has churned out pros at an amazing level. And Brad Davis has a great pedigree as a position coach. So you feel like, based on the guys they've brought into this program, that Kelly has checked off on and that Davis has handpicked and that he's going to develop, you feel like there's a reasonably good chance that LSU is going to field a pretty good offensive line. And I thought that LSU did a good job on the offensive line in the Texas Bowl. It helps to have a real veteran quarterback back there who quite literally gets the ball out of his hands as fast as anybody in college football and can help with protections and quick releases and quick decision-making. That helps an offensive line. But he can't make them run block, and that's got to happen quickly. And so that's Brad Davis's task here, to take this group and try to get them up to speed as quickly as he can in terms of running the football. And they're going to look at a lot of different variations. You're not just going to see DJ Chester at center. You're going to see him some at guard. That we know. You're going to see, I believe, Josh Thompson move around. I think you're going to see different guys at left and right tackle to get a look. What does Weston Davis look like at right tackle? What does Tyree Adams look like at left tackle? Okay. Carius Curran's backing him up at left tackle. Do we want to see if Josh Thompson can play one of the tackle spots? Where's Cohen Eccles in this mix? They really liked what he did leading up to the Texas Bowl. So there are a lot of different things they're going to look at, and that's why Brian Kelly made sure to say, hey, don't necessarily go right to the rotations, not just with the offensive line, but with every position group on the field, and he mentioned that in his press conference after practice.
There's not a lot that I would read into, like, who's in the first group, who's in the second group. We're still sorting out, rotations, things of that nature. So, again, we're nowhere near, like, this is the group that we're rolling out for the opener against Clemson. It's going to be a new rotation on Friday, so you'll get a chance to see a lot of different guys.
And I'll be on the lookout for that. I wrote in my practice report the 2 offensive lines that went out there, because in a 25-minute effort where you've got most of the guys working on technique against cones and bags, guys in a formation is probably the most noteworthy thing you're going to be able to write about in that 25 minutes that you have out there. Like, I could tell you, man, look at that explosive move into the sled by Patrick Payton. Wow. That's not necessarily very... We know that Patrick Payton, who's a fifth-year college football player, can move the sled, okay? Wow. Whit Weeks and Harold Perkins aren't out there. Well, you pretty much knew that. I wrote it anyway, but you pretty much knew that. You probably learned something when I write on the Louisiana Sports Line. Hey, this is what the first-team offensive line looked like. That's what the second-team offensive line looked like. But we'll juxtapose that with Friday's lineup and see just how different it is. If DJ Chester is at left guard on Friday, well, you'll know, well, they're just kind of cross-training. They want to see how both of those look. And I think that's exactly what the spring is for. LSU doesn't have to do installation to a strong degree in the spring. You certainly are putting some things in. You're making sure that your guys are on the same page, but you're not a new coordinator on one side of the ball that's got to install the entire game philosophy, the principles, the identity of one side of the ball in this spring workout. You don't have that. You've got Blake Baker back. You've got Joe Sloan back. This is about finding the personnel that fits into the scheme that you've already put together, and they're working on that on the offensive line. I'm concerned because you lose so many starts and a high draft pick. I'm encouraged by the fact that the track record from Brian Kelly and Brad Davis is good. And you look at the guys and how they were evaluated by those who do such a thing when they're in high school. You feel like you've got some talent there. They've got to figure it out and continue to work through it. And that's what this spring drills are for. And that's what I wrote about on Tuesday morning. And that's what we'll look at coming up on Friday. All right, that's our Genesis opening drive, talking some LSU football. Step aside. When we come back, we will talk to Luke Johnson about the Saints, who are signing a lot of folks who have already played for the Saints. We'll talk about that next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
One Bath and Closets. OneBathAndClosets.com is the website. David Duvall and his team, 30 years redesigning and remodeling bathrooms and closets. Safety is a big deal in the bathroom, absolutely, especially as folks in your life age. If that rings a bell to you and you want to mitigate some of that risk in what could be a really hazardous situation in the bathroom, call David Duvall at One Bath and Closets. They can do non-slip floors. They can do handrails around slippery areas. They can do walk-in tubs. They're more convenient. They're safer. They can do a bench in the shower so that that's not as hazardous a situation for those aging in your life. All that and more are some of the things that David Duvall and his team do all the time. You can check out pictures of their fantastic work at OneBathAndClosets.com. You can request that free consultation. They'll tell you about the financing that's available. 0% up to 18 months, same as cash if you qualify. It's all there online at OneBathAndClosets.com. OneBathAndClosets.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
Took a look at the SEC baseball slate for week 1 on Saturday, I think it was, in the morning, and I was like, whoa. I mean, you take LSU and Missouri out, which should be a mismatch. We'll see, but it should be. The other 7 series are great. I cannot wait to see how it starts shaking out, and that's going to be every single week moving forward with SEC baseball, starting this weekend with LSU and Missouri and some really good action around the league. So we'll talk to Joe Healy from D1 Baseball coming up in 15 minutes. Luke Johnson covers the Saints for The Advocate. There's news breaking seemingly every 5 minutes with the New Orleans Saints, so we'll borrow just a little bit of time here from Luke. We appreciate the time, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on, as usual.
It is our pleasure. It seems like I'm going back to when Ed Ogeron took the job at LSU, and he wanted to be really sure that anyone who had played at LSU was welcome to come back. It feels like if you have played for the Saints at one point or another, you are very much welcome to come back under this Kellen Moore staff. You look at Chase Young coming back and Juwan Johnson coming back. They re-signed Will Clapp and Isaac Yiadom and a bunch of guys that have been, it seems like they're kind of getting the band back together, no?
A little bit, yeah. But the funny thing is that, those guys who just re-signed today and Yiadom and Clapp did not play for these coaches, for the Saints, but they played for them with other teams. Yiadom played for the 49ers last year, where Brandon Staley was there, and he was with Brandon Staley in Denver as well. Will Clapp, when he left the Saints, he went to play under Brendan Nugent, who coached him with the Saints and is now coaching with the Saints again. So some of that stuff is just existing relationships from other teams, but I mean, this is a Saints roster that's kind of low on talent, and they're trying to keep some of their better talent that they did have from last year's team. I think I'm higher on some of those deals than others, but they've got to keep good players here. And especially with guys like Juwan Johnson and Chase Young. I mean, there's salary cap stuff with this too. Those guys were going to have dead money hits if they didn't re-sign with the Saints. So, that's part of that is accounting as well.
So let's talk about those two specifically. Start with Juwan Johnson. It's not a massive contract among tight ends in the NFL, but it is a substantial number when you just kind of look at it on its face. What did you think about the deal in its totality to bring him back?
Yeah, this one's a bit of a head scratcher for me. I really like Juwan personally. I think he's a great guy for the locker room. I think he's got potential as a player, but he just hasn't shown it yet. I'm just not sure if $10 million a year is a really smart investment there. Like I said about the dead money, I think they would have owed him, or they would have had to account for $6.5 million in dead money just on his voided contract. If he didn't re-sign with the club. But $10 million just feels a little rich. And maybe Kellen Moore is seeing, some of this potential and how it could fit into his offense. I think it's really important to have a move tight end in the modern NFL. But at some point he's got to deliver on this potential. And, he's an older player for somebody who's, still fairly young in his career. He's going to turn 30 on this contract. So I'm a little cooler on this one, even though it's going to be a pleasure having Juwan around to talk to still.
Chase Young coming back after a prove-it deal with the Saints. They felt like he proved it. They're going to bring him back on a longer deal. How do you feel about that one?
I feel a lot better about that one. I know he didn't really deliver the sack production last year, but when you just look at the market for pass rushers in the NFL, I mean, he's going to be the 19th highest paid edge rusher in the league. He's still just 25 years old. And, people don't want to hear potential, but it's there. There is more there for Chase Young. And even if he just is the guy he was last year, I think that's an investment for this defense. I don't buy the fact that, or by the idea that he's not going to be motivated anymore because he's gotten paid, because he's going to be 28 by the time his contract expires. He's going to be ready to sign another free agent deal then. So I really think this was a good signing by the Saints. If you give yourself the opportunity to maybe tap into a guy with 10 plus sack potential for $17 million a year, I think you got to take it.
I did not realize Chase Young was only 25. That I would have gotten
it's
that
crazy,
wrong.
Right?
I would have said 27 for sure.
NFL season.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. It doesn't really make sense. Paulson Adebo was kind of a highly sought after free agent this year because he's only 25 and he's coming off his rookie year. I mean, or his rookie deal, and Chase Young is the same age, and he entered the league like 2 years earlier than Paulson Adebo. So it's kind of crazy.
Let's talk secondary with Will Harris, and then with obviously Paulson Adebo, who you just mentioned, and then Isaac Yiadom. Like, how do you feel how that group is coming together?
Still a work in progress, I think. I'm coming around on the Justin Reed deal. I was a little skeptical of it at first, but I think he's coming off of arguably his best season as a pro. He's won two Super Bowls. He's been to another one. I think that's valuable to have on your team. And really, safety has been kind of a black hole for the Saints team since Marcus Williams left. And I think it's really important to have a good player there in this scheme. Especially somebody like Justin Reed, who's really versatile. Like, he can play in the box, he can play deep safety, he can give you some pass rush off the edge. I think he's going to be a good player in this defense. Corner is definitely a work in progress still. Like, Yiadom signed a nice deal for him, 3 years and $9 million. He played pretty well when he was pushed into the starting role in 2023. But I don't think he can go into the season being like, yeah, he's our starter there. And the only other options on the team are Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry. Like, I feel like that's still an area that they're going to address either in free agency or the draft, and just look for a starting caliber player. So like maybe one of the first 2 picks could be a corner. It's really, to me, even after the Yiadom signing, it's like one of the weakest spots in the roster at the moment.
This is a hard one because it's all encompassing, but maybe it's easier in this medium than it is to write it on your side. Like, how do you feel about the overall approach of the Saints early in free agency relative to kind of what they did last year and what it means for how the organization plans to move forward, I guess?
Well, yeah, I think they're doing a pretty good job with what they have, but what they have isn't much, So, like, I don't think they're going to be getting any like A grades in free agency. But I think it is interesting that they are a little bit more active this year than they were last year when they only signed one player to more than a 1-year deal, and that was Cedric Wilson. It was like $2.5 million a year. So yeah, they're definitely looking to build on this roster. I think you could argue whether that's a good idea for a team that just came off a 5-12 season, hasn't made the playoffs in 4 years. But yeah, I think they still, rightly or wrongly, feel good about this roster and some of the pieces on this roster, and think if they add some things to it and strengthen it, they can be at least something that is contending for a division title. Again, this is like something where you can definitely argue with that process and say, maybe it'd be a better idea to tear it down, but frankly, it's just something they're not going to do under Mickey Loomis. And if they hit on this draft, which is a big if considering their recent history, you could see a path for them to dig their way out of this. Their cap situation is going to be better next year than it was this year. It's going to be even better than that 2 years from now, as long as they don't make any more kind of crazy cap moves, which is always part of the equation with them. But like, you can see a path. It's just maybe not one that is like the one everybody wants them to take.
It's interesting. I would like them to sit it out, but that's just not the way they're gonna handle it. So that's just the way that we'll have to cover it as well. Last thing here, Luke, we appreciate some time. Is there a player or a position you could see the Saints adding over the next couple of days?
Yeah, I mean, I think corner was the first one on that, and they addressed that this morning. It wouldn't surprise me to see them kind of wade into this pool of available free agent wide receivers. There's a lot of guys with a lot of NFL success, like on the resume, who maybe are no longer number 1 or number 2 wideouts, but they could be really, really intriguing options as a complement to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So it wouldn't surprise me to see them kind of maybe wait out this initial wave of free agency and see if some of those veteran wide receivers that are available could potentially fit their price range and serve as a complement to those 2 guys they already have. Because I think that's like when you're looking at this offense, outside of the starting guard, which is it is what it is. yeah, I think that's kind of one of the more like obvious weaker spots in this roster, and it's frankly something that's been a weak spot since Michael Thomas injured his ankle early in week 2 of 2021. So yeah, I think that's an area that wouldn't surprise me if that's somewhere they kind of kick the tires in some of these players.
He's on Twitter at @Luke_Johnson, all over the free agent news. We talk to him every Thursday right here on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Luke, we appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Luke Johnson of The Advocate with us on Thursdays. If you're looking for Saints coverage, you can find it on LouisianaSports.net with Ross Jackson. Certainly can find it on our channel, Hunt on Saints. Hunt on Saints on your podcast, also on YouTube as well. This is a fast and furious time with roster composition in the NFL. It's been interesting to watch from the sidelines here as the Saints have kind of maneuvered. I don't love it. I don't love everything they're doing, but it's interesting. And it's right with their MO for a long time, which to a lot of people means a lot of bad stuff, but it's the way they're going to proceed. So we'll continue to have our thoughts, our comments, and cover it as we move forward through this free agent cycle into the NFL draft, which comes up next month. All right, Joe Healy's going to be with us when we come back. I'm fired up to talk about a huge weekend in SEC baseball. That's next on the Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com. When I say Genesis of Baton Rouge, you should think luxury. When I say luxury, think Genesis of Baton Rouge. Get behind the wheel. See the difference. They've got lots of different options for you on the lot. You've got the sedan all the way up through the SUV. Whatever your family situation is, whatever you may need, Genesis has a vehicle for you. You may not have gotten behind the wheel of one. Wouldn't surprise me. They're not all that old. New to the game, basically. They've been there, Airline and PQ, for just about 2 years. If you hadn't stopped by, highly recommend you do so. Chat with one of their brand ambassadors. Tell them the Hunt Palmer Show sent you by. They'll get you behind the wheel, and you'll see the difference. Stylish, sleek, comfortable, fantastic design, and very, very safe. It's all there on the line. You can start your search at genesisofbatonrouge.com because every car that is on the lot is online at Genesis of Baton Rouge. They're at Airline and PQ, Genesis of Baton Rouge.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Towards the weekend here, Thursday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show, 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. And this weekend, of course, the first weekend of Southeastern Conference baseball play. 10 weeks, 30 games, teams trying to jockey for positioning for postseason baseball. And it all starts coming up on Friday. Missouri at the box to play LSU, and 7 other series that we'll certainly talk about. Joe Healy's going to be all over it with D1 Baseball, part of the SEC Extra Team. He and Mark Etheridge do fantastic work, and he's with us on Thursdays. Joe, we can debate about conference realignment as it pertains to football scheduling, about cross-country flights, losing rivalries and whatnot. But as I look at this schedule for SEC baseball and consider they're going to do this 9 more times after this weekend, it's like a smorgasbord of just incredible matchups that to me are endlessly entertaining. You feel the same way?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you look at this weekend and you can see Texas, Mississippi State in Starkville, and it's just like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing now. So I'm with you, and I don't know about you, but it just felt like the non-conference portion of the season this year was so long, and I'm not really sure exactly why. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that, as my colleague Mark Etheridge looked up, the SEC in non-conference play had 70 wins by 10 or more runs and only 35 losses. So twice as many wins by 10 or more than they had losses. And so it just kind of goes to show that we haven't had a ton of competitive baseball so far.
Yeah, I wrote about it a little bit. The sport's gotten a little bit regional from that perspective, but for these 10 weeks, it's baked right into where we are. So we'll certainly enjoy that. I want to start with Tennessee and Florida in Knoxville. I like Florida. We talked about that last week. Tennessee's obviously unbeaten to this point, 17-0, and a pair of Liams will get the baseball tomorrow. How do you see that weekend up there at Lindsey Nelson?
Yeah, with the pitching matchup, maybe the guy best equipped to compete with Liam Doyle right now is Liam Peterson. Obviously, we'll see, but that might be as tough, kind of a Friday starter on Friday starter matchup as we get all season. I also find it interesting that as often as Liam Doyle uses his fastball, and obviously it's like elite of the elite, like the 0.1% of fastballs. I mean, the whiff rate on that thing is like 60%. And typically with a fastball, you're doing pretty good if you can crack 30% whiff rate. So he's double that. But with him throwing as many fastballs as he does, and Florida being a team that, like, hey, man, if there's one thing they do well, it's hit a fastball. I get that Liam Doyle's is different, but still, if Liam Doyle is 10% less effective than he's been the last few weeks, this could be the kind of game where, Doyle strikes out 15 and gives up 4 home runs, right? And, Peterson may pitch well enough to get a Florida win in that game, or not. We'll see. But I'm with you that seems like the most intriguing on paper.
Sneaky, one of the good rivalries in SEC baseball over the last 5-8 years has been Arkansas and Ole Miss. They'll play in Oxford over the weekend. Arkansas is number 3 in the country, 16-1. Ole Miss is 14-2. Arkansas has hit the ball the last couple of weeks, and Ole Miss has probably been a little bit better than I thought they would be. How do you see that one there in Oxford?
Yeah, consider me intrigued by Arkansas's lineup. I get that we've been fooled before, so I'm still kind of a little bit in wait-and-see mode, but I've been pretty well convinced that this lineup is at least a bit better than the ones we've seen the last couple of years, because if you're not going to have, a standout centerpiece in the lineup, and maybe they do with one or both of the Aloy brothers, I guess we'll see in SEC play, but even if they don't, I mean, then if you put together a lineup that's dangerous 1 through 9, you can kind of mitigate some of that, and I think that might be what Arkansas has done here. The most interesting piece of that for me is that I think what's going to be, I don't want to say the sole thing that Ole Miss is going to have to do in conference play to be more successful, because I don't want to put it on one thing, but the main thing I would say is that if Ole Miss is going to be successful, it has to have guys, whether it's Riley Maddox, Mason Nichols, or somebody else. They have to have somebody behind Hunter Elliott that can get SEC hitters out consistently, and those 2 other guys have been okay so far this year, but against the schedule they faced, I would have liked to have seen more from them. So is this a team in Ole Miss that's going to maybe win some Fridays because Hunter Elliott's kind of back to being the guy we saw a few years ago? And then they lose a lot of series because they just don't have enough pitching in days 2 and day 3. So I'm kind of fascinated by that matchup as we go into the weekend.
Have you seen enough of Hunter Elliott to say, hey, that's the guy we saw in Omaha a few years ago?
Yeah, I think so, because it's not just that the numbers are good, though they are. The stuff is up. The stuff is better. I think it's a little sharper than what it was back then. He's still, if you really want to nitpick it, like he's still walking more guys than I would like, but that was kind of who he was back in 2022. If you look at his numbers there, it's really good numbers with the exception of we prefer him walk a few fewer guys, so I just kind of think that's who he is. But the stuff is better. The numbers are what they are. So it doesn't make him the 3rd best ace or the 7th best ace in the SEC. I don't know, but I do think he is back in that conversation.
Texas A&M will welcome in Alabama this weekend. Jace Laviolette is hitting .241. Hayden Schott is hitting .241. Gavin Cash is hitting .250 with 2 home runs, and they have the worst fielding percentage in the SEC. A&M has probably been the most talked about team in the league to this point. They're at home this weekend. Do you expect them to get off to a good start against Alabama?
I think so. I think there's some things in that matchup that I think will be helpful. Alabama's got some nice pieces on the mound, but even if you assume Zane Adams is going to throw the ball well, and I don't know that we can assume that, it's not like it's been perfect for him so far. You're ultimately dealing with a Riley Quick who is still probably on an 80 pitch count. I've not talked to Rob Vaughn. I don't know that, but still working his way back. He hasn't eclipsed 70 so far this year, and he's not the most efficient pitcher. So, you're looking at 4 or 5 innings at best there, and Alabama still doesn't have a Sunday starter, and their bullpen is still trying to figure out who they like. They're still cycling through a lot of guys. So I do think there's an opportunity for some of A&M's hitters to get off to better starts, get rolling a little bit. That's the part of their game that I'm not all that worried about. I am a little more worried about the defense, because typically defense doesn't slump, at least not to the degree offense does. Like Jace Laviolette, I've seen some of the numbers that says he's hitting the ball as hard as he ever has. He's just not getting the hits. So we'll see about that. But defense kind of tends to be either there or it's not. And so they're probably better than 962 or 961 or whatever it is, but I don't know that this is going to be an elite SEC defense or even a good one. And that's kind of problematic in an SEC where you and I both know that the margins are pretty thin.
Got to catch the ball, no question about that. Prager is a proven guy at the top of the rotation for A&M. How do you feel about Justin Lampkin behind him?
Oh, it's a little more flammable,
yeah.
To put it that way. He has moments where I guess I'll put it this way. If he was the Sunday guy and we just knew that, like, I'd feel pretty good about it. Because you know what? He's going to have Sundays where it just doesn't go well, and you get him out of there, and you just have to win an ugly Sunday game, which every team in the SEC has to do. But he's also going to have games where he's the best Sunday guy in the conference. But because he's the Saturday guy and they're really leaning on him, that makes me a little bit more nervous, because he's another guy. I don't want to necessarily downplay it. Maybe it's famous last words, but I just kind of think he is what he is. And that's a nice piece. I'm just not 100% sold that he's like a true Saturday guy who can back up Prager in the way they're going to need him to.
Vanderbilt's at Auburn. There was a time there for about a decade where Vanderbilt was as talented a team as there was in the country every year. Is that no longer the case?
Yes. The short answer is yes. That is no longer the case. Now, they are still obviously a cut below that, but, I'm kind of looking around, and I think if you even go back just a handful of years, and we can even throw Rocker and Leiter out because those guys are outliers if you want to do that. But you look at some of the guys, it felt like every year they had a Friday guy that was like, a top 5 pick, and maybe I'm underrating J.D. Thompson, right? But just generally speaking, like, they always had the guy now, and then they had another guy who was like, all right, this is our next guy when he's a junior, but he's a freshman right now. And they're just not doing the conveyor belt kind of thing on the mound they used to. And the guy that was supposed to be that guy is Ethan McElvain. And it kind of seems to me that they've maybe resigned themselves a little to the fact that they're going to have to piggyback him in his starts, which, look, if it works, it works. But when you were talking about the type of pitcher Ethan McElvain was getting to Vanderbilt, that's not what you were hoping he would be, right? So there's that piece. And then we've talked about the offensive part of it. Like, again, this is an offense I think is a little bit better, and maybe Brody Johnston is kind of the next big position player to go through Vanderbilt and be a J.J. Bleday, Dansby Swanson type pick. But if he's not, it's going to continue this streak of, Vanderbilt not really having that thump in the middle of the order. As much as I like R.J. Austin, and he's one of the most dynamic players in the country, he's just not, the physical guy you kind of have to have as a centerpiece in the lineup in the SEC.
All right, let's talk about LSU as the Tigers welcome in Missouri. And I realize that we're here in Baton Rouge, but I look at these matchups, and if you take LSU and Missouri out, everything looks really compelling. LSU should overmatch Missouri, but we'll see. It's 3 baseball games. What concerns you, if anything, about LSU through 4 weeks of non-conference baseball?
I just think it's not much, I guess, is what I would say first to make sure I get out in front of that. But beyond that, it's just, they're going to be leaning on guys that haven't gone through the 10 weeks of SEC play, right? I mean, even Cade Anderson, who's one of the more experienced pitchers, hasn't done the full 10 weeks. We need you out there every Friday to be a real guy. Ianson, obviously not. Shores, because of his injury, not. Kason Evans, William Schmidt, the young arms, obviously not. Zach Cowan, a transfer from Wofford, hasn't been through it, right? So, like, that's just different. You talked about it at the top. Like, it's 10 weeks, no weeks off for finals, really no let up, especially because LSU gets Missouri week 1. Your next 9 are going to be all teams that have postseason aspirations and are probably right to have postseason aspirations. And that's just different. So I don't really have huge worries, but I do think there could be moments where you have to maybe put a guy down a little bit, maybe give him a weekend off, maybe use him in a different role to kind of get him back on track. And offensively, I mean, literally almost no notes right now because they're humming along. They have probably 12 guys that deserve playing time and they just don't have room for everybody. The depth is incredible. So, obviously we can revisit this conversation if things go sideways, but right now I feel like it's a team in a really good place.
I'll just kind of leave it open-ended here. What can LSU fans expect from Missouri this weekend?
Well, they are going to try to put pressure on LSU. Let's see if they can do it successfully. But this team is not quite what they were last year, where it was like that was all they had in their bag. Last year it was kind of like, hey, if we don't steal bases or bunt for hits or make somebody throw the ball around the yard, we're not going to be successful offensively. I do think there's a little bit more feel to hit now. Probably not any more power, but they do have some guys. Caden Nicoletto is the guy you need to watch there, and he's kind of a fun guy if you're just a baseball kind of nerd because it's not a great body. He's not that athletic. He's kind of short. He's from a Division II school, but the dude just has a great feel to hit. I know the kind of guys that can succeed in college baseball that have, I don't want to be disrespectful, but very little pro future. And I always think that's kind of fun. So look, if LSU plays well, I think it's a sweep, especially given that it's at home. But the way Missouri's going to try to win this game is their pitchers are going to try to get a bunch of ground balls. That's what they do. They don't have a ton of stuff, and they're going to try to win games 5-4 and maybe try to get you to make a couple errors.
We'll see. LSU and Missouri set to go tomorrow at 6:30 Central Time. Joe Healy and Mark Etheridge, the whole team will be all over it. Highway to Hoover, wherever you find your podcasts, and certainly D1 Baseball's SEC Extra Package. Enjoy baseball. We'll talk next week, Joe.
All right, Hunt. See you, buddy. At
Joe Healy, D1 is where you can find him on Twitter. Always enjoy our conversations. I'm fired up to watch some baseball this weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how it all shakes out in weekend number 1. When we come back, LSU basketball season is done. We'll talk about it next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Highland Insurance Group, HighlandIG.com is the website. If you're a business owner and I say EPL insurance, do you know what I'm talking about? Cyber insurance, do you know what your limits should be or what the risks are there? How your business may be at risk? What about crime insurance? What about your umbrella limits? If those are things that you may be familiar with, but maybe not, how about you trust your broker? Have Highland Insurance Group in your corner. You can trust them. Highland Insurance Group, Jonathan Carver and his team always tell me, like, I want folks to treat us like their attorney, like their CPA. Those are folks you trust with your numbers and if things get tight. That's what you should feel about your insurance broker as well, not just the guy who runs up to the desk and can save you 3% on renewal. They're going to take premium into account, I can promise you. They're going to make sure you are covered and your business is taken care of. That's what you pay your insurance broker to do, and that's what the Highland Insurance Group will do. Find them online at HighlandIG.com. It's the Highland Insurance Group, HighlandIG.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
Dreadful conference basketball season came to an end last night for LSU. 91-62, 29-point loss to Mississippi State. Tigers finished 14-18 overall. Tigers finished 3-15 in league play, 3-16 if you talk about conference play. And look, there's not a lot to talk about in the game. LSU went 10 minutes to end the first half without a field goal. 10 freaking minutes and couldn't make one field goal.
Happened in the last game too.
Mississippi State is a wildly mediocre defensive team. They've been pretty good offensively. Could not do anything LSU offensively. They can't guard Josh Hubbard. Couldn't do it last year. Couldn't do it this year in 2 tries, and they got smoked and were never competitive in the game. That's pretty obvious. And so now you look forward towards next year. And I know that there are the vast, overwhelming majority of LSU basketball fans have completely tuned this entire program out and are not in a hurry to pick it back up in next November, December, January, February at all. Like that's just the reality of where LSU fans are with this current basketball program, and I get it. And I don't think that anybody's going to go nuts over what LSU does in the transfer portal because they got some guy from Dayton or this guy from Central Florida. They pulled this guy from Cal Santa Barbara, or they got this guy from Iowa State. Like, I just don't think that's going to do anything for LSU fans. But the fact of the matter is that here's where you are. And LSU has not, in the last 4 years, shown that it's anywhere near what Auburn or Alabama or what this Florida team is doing, what Texas A&M's built over the last 3 years, what Tennessee's done over the last 6-7 years with Rick Barnes. Like, you're not even close. But the fact remains that it can be changed really quickly because you saw Missouri go to the tournament in year 1 under Dennis Gates, and then in year 2 they went winless in the league, and they're going to the tournament this year. Last year, Lamont Paris was the coach of the year in the league. This year, they were last place. Vanderbilt last year was terrible. They weren't any good the entire Stackhouse run. They're going to the tournament this year. So, like, it can be changed really, really quickly. What we know is that through 2 years, I'm throwing the first year out, and I don't care if you don't like that. It just is what it is. That was an impossible situation for Matt McMahon. The last 2 years, not an impossible situation. Last year, mediocre. This year, disaster. So we know, based on the last 2 years, that given inadequate resources, LSU can't compete. We know that. So if you want to continue to give inadequate resources, LSU won't compete. The thought is you'll learn next year whether or not adequate resources, not top-tier resources, adequate resources result in a roster that can compete in the toughest league in America. That's what you're going to learn. And if you're sitting here and you're an LSU fan and you say one of two things, I do not care because I don't think it's going to work, fine. And if you say I'd like to wait and see, fine. But the fact of the matter is that that's where things are going. And the product that LSU put out there this year was completely unacceptable. You can blame injuries. They happened. You can blame recruiting. That happened. You can blame evaluation, development, on-game management, execution, all that stuff. None of it was any good. That's how you go 3-15. That's how you're the 15 seed in the conference tournament, and you go out there against a team that's under 500 in the SEC and lose by 30. There is no other way to look at it. There is no analysis that can be given. So if you want to stay in this lane, it won't work. However, if you want to try to play with the big boys a little bit more, Vanderbilt just announced they're going to throw $1.5 million and then match it with another $1.5 million to throw $3 million at the roster next year. That's what it's going to take. And it doesn't mean you have to go to Duke and get their guys. We know the stories. Mark Sears is from Ohio. Janai Broome, Morehead State. Dalton Connect, somewhere in Colorado, northern Colorado or something. I don't know. Great players in the league. And you can do it with your Wade Taylors as well. Wade Taylor's a nice 4-star recruit, doesn't really have a huge NBA future. He's going to already set the Texas A&M scoring record because they got him in from high school and let him develop for 4 years. But none of that's going on right now is working because the high school players that Matt Mann has brought in have been a little bit underwhelming. A lot of the transfers that have come in have not made the jump to the Southeastern Conference, and the ones that do are usually like one at a time. KJ Williams, nice year. Good job. Heck of an effort by Cam Carter this year. Awesome. But too many guys that have been put around them have tried to step up to this level and have not been able to do it. And to this point, the record is what it is. So for LSU, you've got a head start. You got to get with the guys that you want, see if you can keep them, understand how many spots you've got moving forward, and then you've got to go in the transfer portal and you can be lock, stock, and barrel. You don't have to worry about going to the tournament or flying to the Sweet 16 or going to the Final Four and all that. Go get new players. That's what it's got to be. A lot of them, like 8 or 9. That's it for hour number 1. We got some baseball to talk about in hour number 2. Chris Blair with us as well, and some power rankings. Come back with us after Sports Center. It's a Thursday edition of The Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.